So I'm the director of music here. There's a lot of things that I do, primarily accompanying the liturgies, planning the music for the liturgies, arranging cantors, working with our schola. That serves the liturgical function, but then there's also teaching all of the men who attend St. Mary's Seminary chants, whether it's chants they find in the Missal, various propers, hymns, and getting them acquainted with music. And of course, there's a wide array of abilities and aptitude, and just overall getting them acquainted with all things sacred music so that they can become, competent and confident singers in the Mass, and also be able to lead and manage both employees that are musicians and also just their congregations when they go out and are pastors. So I guess starting from the very beginning, I've always been a pianist. I started playing piano when I was quite young, around 5 years old. And then in high school, I took up the organ concurrent with the piano. I went to college and I studied piano there. That's what my first degree was in, my bachelor's. And continued thereafter. I found employment at a Catholic church in Omaha, Nebraska, worked there for some time. I had decided that I wanted to go get a graduate degree in music, and I started in piano, but then I had decided, just speaking with other professionals and just knowing that there was a lacuna in my own abilities and my knowledge, that I really wanted to switch in a committed way to organ. So in my graduate work, I did organ performance. I continued working in Omaha, and then I was brought to a job actually in Sugar Land. I worked as the director of music for St. Teresa Catholic School, and I did that for a number of years, and then this job became open here, and so I moved here. I had worked with the current rector previously in his capacity as pastor at St. Teresa Catholic Church, the school particularly in Sugar Land, and so I've been doing this since about 2021. Well, that would be ultimately a question for people with more competency, for the rector, for the vice rector. Certainly, I'm in my own little world here with regards to music, but I would say I witness, care and attention throughout the grounds. You had just met Deacon Ferdinand. It seems he's always involved with some either kind of renovation. For instance, we had the new dormitory that was erected and dedicated, or I guess blessed, the first year I was here, which was a huge project, so that the men would have suitable living conditions to continue their work and their education. But it always seems that there's some continued effort to just beatify the grounds and also just care for the grounds. The details thereof, you'd have to ask others more competent than myself. So I'm relegated mostly to the organ and music. Sure. Well, so renovation is an interesting word. I mean, this is a brand new instrument suited to the building. So as far as the beginnings of this, when I was brought on, there was some discussion, and I knew that the instrument that was the current instrument at the time, there were some issues that needed to be addressed. So when that would occur even in my tenure, I was not altogether sure, nor was the rector at the time. And so as these things tend to happen, various things came together, and now we're here celebrating the new instrument. Again, when I was brought on, the instrument that we had at the time was in some ways sufficient, right? But it was an amalgam of the original instrument that was in LaPorte at the original seminary, so quite old, and then various other elements, accretions that had occurred over time. And so, and none of them really kind of working in concert with each other. Imagine just a vehicle where you have various parts that really do not synchronize well, and it was running quite poorly and insufficient really to the liturgical demands, right? It really was not serving the community well. So that was apparent when I came on. I would say that it was actually just through a conversation with the rector, I'd like to begin talking about this. And so I just accrued information about various instruments based on what I knew would be the direction we might be moving in. And I would say that began fairly soon after I began, which was August of 2021. So then beginning in 2022, I had given a multi-page, very long document of research of various churches, various builders, my recommendations of directions to go, from doing a complete just overhaul of the instrument, keeping elements of it, adding to it, to considering something brand new with the various estimates for cost and what that would mean for the community involvement. And so it just kind of sprang from there. Well, not quite. So in terms of the organ itself, it would have been the 1920s. I believe the date I have in my mind, it may not be accurate, as 1927. I believe is when it was constructed and installed in the Seminary in La Porte, which began in 1901. So that instrument was developed and installed there in 1927 when the campus moved here, and this chapel was built in 1954. Another company, not the original company that built that organ, but one that had kind of absorbed or bought out that company, then brought that organ here and made additions to it to try to get it to fit the space a little better. And then thereafter, so that's the 50s, then we had various technicians working on the instrument and adding other things from other organs they found throughout the city, or spare parts that they had. So you can kind of imagine again what was accruing, right? So it became an interesting kind of chimera, amalgam of various parts. So sure. Well, what we do liturgically it's the source and summit of what we do, particularly as Catholics. And so how we accompany that musically is also important, and that means the instruments that we use, right, ought to be something that we give considerable thought to. And so when you consider the community that you're serving, the people that comprise that community, what does it mean to have an instrument which really supports what they do liturgically, what they do in communal prayer? And it was answering that question that kind of led down the road. Okay, well, that's an organ for us, and what ought that organ to be, considering the resources that we have? Certainly. So I would say that the organ's first purpose is obviously to accompany the liturgy, to support the singing, to promote singing, to kind of promote the participation of anyone who's involved. Not only the seminarians, of course. They're going to be involved with it the most because they participate in what we do liturgically the most. Certainly the organ stands on its own as its own work of art, really, right? And so its purpose is to glorify God, particularly in the liturgy, and we have, in my opinion, it's only mine, but in my opinion, we've done that beautifully and successfully in conjunction with Noack and Deacon Ferdinand and so many others. Then, of course, if you are interested in just the art of organ making and organ playing, this also stands on its own as something of real interest of, oh, this is fascinating what they did here, right? And so especially in an area like Houston, where there is no dearth, right, of wonderful organs and wonderful examples, you do something which stands on its identity for the community that it serves, in this case, the wonderful men of St. Mary's Seminary and those who come to participate, but then also is a very interesting musical instrument to get to know, right, and to relate to as a musician. I don't know if that answers your question, but it has interests for, the wider organ aficionado community or musician community, right? First of all, encouraging folks, as we often do, to come participate in things like lessons and carols or processions that we have, right, which is still our own liturgical life, like coming to worship with the men at the seminary. And so you get to hear the organ do what the organ is supposed to do. This is its purpose. We'll have the dedicatory recital that's coming on March 30th, and that's an opportunity to hear the organ just itself. We intend to kind of continue that through performance series and inviting various artists to come and play so we can hear. So we do have a webpage, a Sacred Music webpage, where you can hear about events and also RSVP, right? Because our chapel, because it's suited to the men at our seminary, it's not the biggest venue. It's an intimate one, however, and that's another thing that should be stated as well, that the organ is very much a part of the building, right? It's and I think when we can kind of conceive of it, we have the wonderful architecture that's here. And again, I'll give kudos to Noack and to Didier and his team. That's very much a consideration. It's not just the instrument that makes sound, but it's adding to the architecture. It becomes part of the architectural expression that also serves the liturgical function, right? And so if you want to know more about those kinds of events where people come in, they hear, but they also see the chapel, right? And they hear the chapel, improving the acoustic was very much a part of that, so that it could add to the luster of what we see, then yeah, I would point you certainly to the webpage, and we post things on, for instance, like the AGO website events calendar through the Archdiocese as well. We make that available, our Facebook page. Sure, so there is a daily orarium for the men, and Mass is offered generally just once a day throughout the week. There's also lauds and vespers. They have holy hour on some days, there's communal rosary. So it depends on the day. And then also the degree of the solemnity, let's just say how involved or fancy, if you will, the music is, depends on whether we're celebrating something like the Annunciation, which is a solemnity as opposed to, the memorial for a saint. And so generally that is daily. When we come to Sundays, again, we have Mass together. Because that's a Sunday, those are solemn liturgies. So our lauds and vespers take on a much more, noble kind of aspect. Throughout a weekday, lauds and vespers are usually just by the men themselves singing, but there is singing in every single one of those liturgies. And the organ is involved in as much as it helps to teach and inculcate good singing. So, its influence is indirect for those liturgies where it's not actually making a sound. Yeah, so size is a very interesting thing when discussing an organ, because there's just the architectural space that it occupies, and then there's the size in terms of the number of ranks or the number of stops, how many selections you have on your menu, so to speak, right? The size of the menu. So to give it some context, a brilliant engineering feature of this instrument is this is roughly 3 times the instrument that we had compared to the instrument we had before, right? And yet it occupies, what would you say, Didier, half the space or something like that, right? I don't know if you're familiar with what was here before, but we would not be sitting here where the old instrument was, right? We are able to do that now because there was really probably very strained consideration given to how do we get as much organ as possible that also fits with the overall architecture and footprint and space in as little space as possible and make it efficient. And that becomes very, very tricky to stick all of those elements in. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in terms of actual size, but to give it a comparison, it's not only much bigger, it's much, much more efficient in terms of how it utilizes the space. The builder that designed, constructed, and built this organ is Nowak. And Houston is blessed to have a couple other examples, but this really is a totally different, I shouldn't say totally different, but it is its own distinct personality, you will, or identity from the other 2 instruments that are here, both of which are wonderful. So in some ways, it's a lot like the organ at the Co-Cathedral. It's a split case, but its size is probably, at least half that at the Co-Cathedral. The space is a lot smaller, and its conception in terms of its tonal array is going to be a little different than an organ. So I wouldn't say it's completely different, but it certainly has enough of its own very distinct and very interesting aspects to make it something very special. My work is particularly with Mr. Adam Brill, with who I enjoy a very rewarding professional relationship. So oftentimes if we're doing things, I think of, just to give some concrete examples, like Christmas parties, for instance, that are here that various offices host, or maybe wider kind of archdiocesan liturgies that involve our ordinary, then we get involved and we collaborate on various things. We had a diaconate ordination here recently. We have the Office of Permanent Diaconate that's here. The Office of Worship assists them with their liturgies, and so there's certainly some collaboration that goes on. As a matter of fact, we have one of those liturgies occurring this Saturday, and so I work closely and collaborate and enjoy the collaboration with the Office of Worship and Mr. Brill to make sure that their musical needs are met.
You were talking with Dr. Turner about how this organ came and how it was complex to place into this gallery because the space is rather small. I think the difficulty in organ is, in one way, they are unique. Mm-hmm. We have never done that instrument before. We will never do it again because it's absolutely tailor-made for this space. But in the same time, organ building is a trade, a craft that has been living for 2,000 years. So there's an enormous amount of tradition who comes with it. So permanently we are pulled between all this historical tradition that we have and the necessity of the space. And the necessity of the space is not limited to only the geometry of the space, which is obviously very important, but also beyond that is what is the goal, what is the role that organ is going to have with the community he's going to be living with. Mm-hmm. And an organ for a Catholic church is not going to be the same an organ for a Lutheran church. It's not going to be the same for an organ which would be for an academic situation in university or conservatory. So each situation is different, and that's what is making the job so interesting. So not only we need to learn about the space, but we need to learn about the people. At the end of the day, the organ is for the people, for the community. And what does this community want? What kind of music does it do? And it's not only music in a church or in a seminary. It is music who is going to participate in a liturgy. So we are going to fold all those traditions all together, and that is what makes the job so unique and interesting. It goes all the way from the details to the floor and what's happening underneath, but it's the combination of many ingredients. So an organ, you can, if you want, you can see it through three facets. It's a musical instrument, of course, it's a musical instrument. So the music part is going to be important. But in order to create that music, it has to be a mechanism between the player and the music. So that is a second aspect, is the machine. And you can see it's a big machine. And the third aspect is because it is such a large machine, it becomes an architectural feature, which has to fit, to meld, to flow with the rest of the architecture. So there is a lot of thinking, pushing all the three facets together. And the success of an organ ultimately is how coherent all those facets are going to go together. So in this case, in the case of the seminary, we have a rose window which had to be preserved. So the case could not cover or hide the rose window. We had underneath one side, there is a stairwell that's going to come inside. So we have to accommodate that. We have a truss, which is very low there. And there was a need of accommodating a scholar of singers, and the director of music, Dr. Turner, was needed to be able to direct a scholar. So all that means the console, which is just behind me, had to be placed differently compared with all that. This is an unusual situation to split an organ in two parts. I do not like it as such because you are splitting the coherence of the sound. You have a bit of sound coming from the left, a bit of sound coming from the right. At the end of the day, you want a unique instrument. So that is the sort of thing which we push together and try to create and to preserve the coherence of the instrument. So I'm French. I'm born in Poitiers, France, which is a city which has a very famous old instrument which is preserved from the 18th century, and that instrument has certainly shaped my passion. And as many of youngster, a teenager, I one day encountered the instruments and discovered how the magic of what I was talking a little bit, the mixing of the mechanism, of the machine part, of the architectural part, of the musical part, but also in a absolutely beautiful setting of various churches. This is the chapel, a beautiful 1950s room, which has a lot of character, and it's always fascinating to be able to create something for such a room. I have done apprenticeship in Europe, in France, in England. During one of the installation of one of the organs in New York City, I met my wife, who is American, and at some point we moved to the US. I worked for a Canadian firm and ultimately worked with Fritz Nowak, who had founded his firm in the 1960s. And in 2015, he asked me to take over. And since then, I have been running the Nowak Organ Company, which is situated north of Boston. Not that much, but I mean, in each instance, you arrive and you sit down with the people. Usually it's a music ministry, in that case Dr. Turner, and he tried to explain all the needs that the seminary had and had to be fulfilled. And the previous instrument failed to deliver that. And it was a second-hand instrument. It was something which was put together as the best they could do. And here there was an opportunity to create something from scratch, which would completely, fully satisfy the needs of the seminary. At the end of the day, this is exclusively guided by the need of the seminary. I don't know how we can say best, how define best, and actually that's a difficulty. Now, through what I was explaining, through that 2,000 years of tradition of organ building, obviously various schools of organ building have developed, and they follow the same schools of music. The music in 17th century Spain is not the same as the 19th century in England, and that means each period had developed their own instrument to serve their specific music. So when we build an organ nowadays, we have the choice of going to various schools or try to mix them. So we are a little bit like, I think you could compare, the best way you can compare is Dr. Turner is running a restaurant, and I'm providing the ingredients for his restaurant. So he has to tell me what sort of food he wants to cook. And of course, because we are now going through the world, you want to eat all the food of the world. And I can say, we can do that, but your pantry is not big enough. You need a very big pantry. So we need to narrow down what is you going to do. And you can have Chinese food or Indian food or Mexican food or French food. Or maybe you can mix some of it, make some fusion cooking. But you cannot mix everything with anything. So you need to think about all those ingredients. And those ingredients are the ingredients of the musical schools of each of the countries of each periods. I do most of the design indeed, but I don't do the whole project on my own. There are many people I call out to help me. So there is the team at the workshop, and although they are very versatile, they're usually more specialized in one aspect. There is one of my colleagues did the entire casework on his own. Some did some very complicated mechanical parts. Some were more dedicated to the sound. But I also ask some outside help. I've got with me a good friend and colleague from France who has an extensive experience in what we call voicing, making the voice of each of those pipes, and he helps us thinking and also making that sound what it is. Oh, it's the complexity of that on the machine side was one of the most the most complex that we've done, and we had to prepare that in the workshop. And when we arrived, everything fitted within a quarter of an inch. And fitting is such a large instrument, like a hands and glove. It's quite a wonderful challenge, and it was wonderful to see it coming together. Yeah, it's probably 15,000 moving parts. As I say, nearly 2,000 pipes. The largest one are about, I would say, I think they are close to about 15 foot long. The smallest one look maybe like your pencil. We create all those pipes are actually fed from a box with mechanism, which we call the wind chest. And we don't want to have that wind chest to be too low on the floor, because the pipes will speak directly behind the scola, which would be very unpleasant. We want to elevate those pipes so the sound can go down the nave more easily. There's a lot of little technical details like that we fold naturally into the design. Yeah, but to a degree, it's not always the big moment which is the most touching. It could be also. It was wonderful to see how the seminarians, in general, as a group, were very involved in and interested in how the whole project was falling, and how we have been welcome here. It was wonderful. That project represents probably 2 years of work. So I think on our side about close to 16,000 hours of very specialized labor.